Yeah, yeah.
Oh, but just the
Ironically, more complex than climate change, I reckon.
I bet. Well, just you managed just the accessibility of it is really great. Like it's just so user friendly. Like it's just going to do great, man. Congratulations. It's awesome.
It might do if there's no cinemas in Australia, which is a shame.
Yeah, I know, because you would have had a really good post-screening Q&A, like really robust discussion, I reckon.
This is why it's good to have these chats.
We can be robust in this little Zoom. We can, we've already got 60 people on the call, so I'm sure they've got questions all ready to go.
Lovely.
Okay. Yeah, so how's this running, Carly? What's the basic format?
Well, I'm going to introduce you guys in a moment. We've already begun, so welcome.
I think we're already on.
Right on time.
Oh, hi everyone.
Yep, it is 5:33. So I'm going to get started in just a sec, and then we're going to jump right into the questions. Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
So welcome everyone. And before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded land from which I'm joining this meeting today, and that's the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and also the traditional custodians of all the places around Australia for where you all might be tonight. And feel free to acknowledge the country you're joining from in the chat and introduce yourself. The 2021 NAIDOC week theme was Hill Country, and this called for us all to continue to seek greater protections for our lands, waters, our sacred sites, and cultural heritage from exploitation, desecration, and destruction. So I recognise the inextricable links between climate and social justice in Australia, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past and present, and say sorry for all that we've done. Thank you all so much for coming to this very special event. My name's Carly, and I'm a community organiser and team leader here at Climate for Change. And Climate for Change's mission is to create the social climate for effective action on climate change. And I was watching this movie the other day, and that's really what it's about, right? It's about taking power away from lobbyists, from big business, with all their political donations, and putting it back in the hands of community, of society. And there's some great examples of that in the film. So I'm really excited to talk about the different ways that we can do this as we chat with Craig and Damon tonight. And before I get to introducing our wonderful panel members, just a little bit about me and about Climate for Change to put things in context. I started as a volunteer facilitator about 5 years ago, and now I train and support volunteers to facilitate climate conversations. And these 2-hour interactive events in people's lounge rooms, or more recently on Zoom, help everyday people to understand the issue through transformative conversations and then take action. And one of the other things that we do is to help people engage with their elected representatives on a regular basis and start up a dialogue about what they really want to be done and when it comes to climate change. And we call these MP engagement groups, or MPEGs, and we run them regularly. I'm going to tell you a bit more about those tonight, but I feel that that's kind of why we're here talking to Craig and Damon, because it ties into both of their work. And yeah, see what we can come up with. And I'm really looking forward to this Q&A. So I'd like to thank you all for purchasing a ticket and coming along tonight. Fantastic turnout, which is really promising. This event was organised by Hilary McAllister, who's a Climate for Change Fellow. So she's part of the 2021 fellowship. And she has been volunteering to raise funds for our Challenge for Climate. So thank you all for purchasing tickets and for donating. And the event has already raised $4,500 for Climate for Change. So thank you all so much from the bottom of our hearts. So now let's get to why you are all here. We're incredibly thankful to have Craig Reucassel and Damon Gameau joining us. And we're all looking forward to breaking down this film, Big Deal, and taking your questions. So I want to pass on a huge thanks to Leanne from Jungle Entertainment, who facilitated the screening of The Big Deal and allowed this to be shared virtually. And now to our panel. Craig is a familiar face on our TV these days, best known for going through people's rubbish in A War on Waste, and more recently on the shows Fight for Planet A and Big Weather. So Big Deal is Craig's directing debut, and it was great to see some of the Chase's familiar pranks and antics being passed on to Christiaan. So we're very grateful to Craig for taking the time to join us tonight.
Thank you. I don't know about passed on. I just forced him to do it. Right.
I'm sure he loved it. And Damon is an actor, director, and writer, best known for his movie 2040, which spurred a regenerative revolution with 1.5 million students receiving the learning resources, Australia's first seaweed farm, and hundreds of grants being offered to regenerative farmers. And so Damon is an incredible advocate for a regenerative future, and he was recognised for his contribution by being nominated for Australian of the Year in 2020. Damon is the co-founder of Regen Studios, which is working on a new documentary, Regenerate Australia 2030. And we'd also like to thank Alison and Amanda at 2040 for helping get the word out about this screening. So thank you, Damon, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. And just want to start by congratulating Craig on a fantastic film, and really loved it. And it's exactly what we need in this country, and it's accessible and easy to watch and understand, and really is going to have a massive impact. So bravo to you, man. And thanks for having me here. And just quickly acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Bundjalung, the Arakwal people in the Bundjalung Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging as well. But thank you, Craig.
Yeah, cheers. And can I say I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And Damon, I noticed you're going back from 2040 to 2030. Should we meet at 2025 and do something together? We'll just
yeah, okay.
Backing down in time then, I noticed.
Yeah.
Meet in the middle. So to kick us off, before we get into the questions from our attendees tonight, and there's already some being put into the Q&A there. So for everyone, if you do already have questions, pop them into the Q&A feature. So when I was watching this film the other night, which, yes, is amazing, so much to talk about here. I don't know how we're going to get through it in an hour. I was watching with my housemate, and about halfway through we stopped for a chat, and he said, yeah, I'm not really shocked by any of this. Like, it's depressing, but it's like, we just accept that that's the way it is. Was there anything as you were making it, Craig, that did shock you?
Yeah, it's interesting because in a sense, I've been aware of this issue for a long time, and I've always wanted to look at it. So it's not like the whole issue as a starting point shocked me. I think seeing it in action and kind of getting to the granular level is what shocked me. So seeing, sitting with Sam Dastyari for an hour and just hearing him laying out, there's no limits, we get this. It's kind of, in a very unemotional way. We get it because we need to buy these ads, which are $1 million a night, and that's how you get the thing. And you just go, okay, yeah, wow. It's kind of, that was depressing. And also seeing people like Jeff McCloy, who are on the other side of it, saying, yeah, I spent $100,000 for a lunch with the premier and that. It's that kind of element of it that just made it kind of depressing for me. But it's interesting because the thing that probably did shock me the most, and it shocked Christiaan as well, was the interview with David Barrow from Sydney Alliance, where the very emotion that your flatmate talked about, the cynicism, I knew it's like this, where David Barrow kind of said, yeah, the people in power want you to take that sense and go, it's all just shit and we can't fix it and I'm going to get out of it. And you go, of course, yes, they win by that very response. They win by not kind of going, I'm cynical and I hate this, but I'm going to do something about it. And that was the bit, for me, where a real penny dropped, actually. So, yeah, there was kind of, I was shocked on the negative and the positive side with seeing some of the kind of community activism as well. So, yeah, we know it's there, but kind of seeing it, I was still shocked by elements of it.
Some of those interviews, there was just no filter. They were just like, this is the way it is.
There's worse stuff. There were people that wouldn't come on that told us even more crazy stuff. So that's the amazing thing, is unfortunately that is slightly filtered. And there's a lot of fear from people because of the power of government. There's fear from people saying, I can't come on and tell you how this operates because I'll never get a job again, that kind of thing. You go, okay, there's power on both sides of this. There's power in business, there's power in government.
Damon, what about you? As you were watching, was there anything that you just couldn't believe?
No, I sort of agree with Craig. I think all of us have got to this point where we've just lost complete faith in the system and the institution in general. I mean, I think it's important to say and acknowledge right up front before we get into some serious nitpicking and bashing that there are a lot of elements of our democracy in this country that we should be sort of grateful for, especially if you compare it to America and in terms of compulsory voting and what that does in broadening the appeal of some of these politicians, even the preferential voting, so that the least liked person is not going to get into power. And even the fact we've got an independent electoral commission, which doesn't happen in the US. And so we get this ridiculous gerrymandering and all sorts of nonsense that goes on there. I mean, thank God we don't have those elements. But that said, there's no doubt that we have a state capture here. And I think we all know that. A lot of people on this call know that our democracy here is as polluted as our atmosphere, unfortunately, and has been for a considerable amount of time. So I get excited, though, watching this film. I felt like this literacy that's starting to emerge, and we're seeing the rise of these independents and the Climate 200 movement and Helen Haynes and Zali Steggall is like something is shifting and people are frustrated. And this Regenerating Australia film I've been doing, we interviewed nearly 5,000 Australians and asked them about, what their concerns were and what they wanted for the future, especially by 2030. And the number one thing that came up was about empowering communities again, disillusion and frustration at governance because the decisions were being made so far away from their own regions and the nuance and complexity that goes on there. So I do feel like we have this really interesting moment in our history right now where we might get to go in a different direction. And so I felt that through the film. I just felt this hope, to be honest, that once we get that literacy up and people understand what is going on, then present them with solutions of how we can move forward. Those two things combined could lead to a very different Australia in a very short amount of time.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing that in the work that I do with Climate for Change and also that the other volunteer facilitators do. When you have these conversations and you see these light bulb moments when people are just, and I was one of those people 5 years ago when I first went to this climate conversation, had never thought about contacting my MP, had never thought about engaging in that way, just went to vote every 4 years and then forgot about it. So yeah, I think this kind of literacy around politics, around climate is really exciting.
But that's what's so crucial about this. And it's interesting. I'm like Damon. I don't. After doing this and looking into Australia's democracy, I am really thankful of some of the institutions. And this is just one element that I think needs to be fixed. And it's partly, there's two elements to it. And what you're talking about, Carly, is so important, which is increasing the voice of the community, making people realize, oh, I can interact with my politician all the time, not just at election time. I can get together with others. And if I'm part of a group, I'm probably going to have more of a voice. And it's about increasing that voice. And on the other side, what the movie is really saying is we've got to fix some of the infrastructure so that the voice of money and lobbies and that just isn't so loud. At the moment, it's too loud. It's kind of turned up, cranked up. There are no caps on donations. There are no caps on spending. There are enormous amounts of lobbyists. And it's kind of go, I'm not saying you will get rid of all money and all lobbyists and that, but we just need to kind of tone it down so that means there can be a much more even debate between the community and those kind of vested interests. And so the work you're doing in getting the kind of community louder is an essential part of it. And then we've also got to fix that kind of just quietening the other part of the vote.
Mate, can you go into a bit more detail about that solution element that Ireland have done, and they sort of realised that voice was too loud and they turned it down? Can you just flesh? I mean, I find that really interesting, that story. Can you just flesh out?
Yeah, and Ireland, Canada, a few countries have done it, and they basically, I mean, they got caught in a real estate scandal because they had a lot of property developers that had a lot of influence in politics, something that no one in Australia can in any way relate to. That's obviously a foreign concept to us. But when they kind of hit the financial crisis, they kind of realized that it was out of kilter. And so they put in caps on donations, they put in lobbying registers and all that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing about this is we don't have to look overseas. We've actually got a lot of these reforms have happened at the state levels. So Queensland, New South Wales, there's all of these, the states have generally brought in much lower things. They've got donations, in Queensland, your donations will go up and be declared within 7 days. Now, how come it takes 7 days in Queensland and between 12 and 18 months at the federal level. That just doesn't make sense. I mean, Queensland is the state that was known as being corrupt in the past. And look what's happened. So, you know, even in Australia, we can see some of these reforms happen. But it is interesting that even where there are those reforms, if you don't have, you can have a register with all this information there, but if you don't have the people in a democracy being active, no one's reading it and no one's interacting with it. And that's why it really is those two sides that have to be there as well. It is, without the kind of strengthening of our democratic core, I don't think it works as well.
Well, I wanted to talk about that, and that kind of apathy, that complacency that is evident here in Australia more so than other countries. And I think Christiaan, who is the presenter in the movie, his background is South African, and he talks at the very start about his parents living through apartheid, and of course they had to fight for the vote, but we have never had to do that. We just kind of take it for granted. So how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this level of kind of complacency?
There is a complacency, and I think it is with the compulsory vote. I agree with Damon, is one of the most essential things saving democracy, because at the moment it points, with all of other social media and that pointing towards extremes, it's the one thing that goes, oh no, hang on a second, I've got to capture the center a bit. But it is interesting. It means we do take it for granted in Australia, and that's probably, I'm from a South African background as well, and it is interesting how the perspective, you just presume that everything's great here, and to a point. I think we're a bit like that in Australia. We're less likely to engage and chat about democracy, but I think that's changing. I think as we see this trust fall away, it's changing the conversation. But trust is so essential, and I really hope that this, by the way, is not a movie that's saying you have to join an independent party. Like, to be honest, if people on this call are passionate and join the Labor Party and the Liberal Party and are really active on those things, it will also strengthen the grassroots and the kind of community voice in those parties as well. Because at the moment we've lost that. And as we've seen in this COVID period, we need to have trust in our politicians. It's really important. Nations that had low trust did much less well in this period. So we've got to fix this.
Yeah, I think too, also there's a, we're missing that sort of that visionary, or the Max Weber, who was the author, used to talk about, you either have transactional prime ministers or transformative prime ministers, and the transactional ones largely just stick to the rules and they implement what's in place. But we get these transformational ones every now and again that want to bring in new policies, and probably Keating was our last one in this country. Since then, people have largely sort of ruled by the book. And I think the Grattan report that came out recently was interesting, that there hasn't really been a major policy reform in our country for like 15 or 16 years, the last couple of decades, and certainly nothing on climate since probably Howard in 2001. So people have kind of lost this sense of looking for visionary leadership from our politicians, and they think, well, why would I bother anymore? I speak to young kids, obviously, in the climate movement. They just laugh at them, and all you have to do is turn on Question Time for 10 minutes, and you think, these are the people that are governing us and making our decisions, and there is no considered response, and there is just these children bickering at each other, and they're supposed to be the one making all these big decisions. So we just need a massive revamp and a bringing back of trust if we're going to get people engaged in politics again. They've got to believe that these people are truly representing them, and I think that's why Helen Haynes is proving so popular, or Zali, or Cathy McGowan. These are real human beings that are fallible, and they're not afraid to say it. They're not speaking this party line and this, econobabble that Richard Dennis talks about. Is that we're all sick of that, and we saw it in America. That's largely why Trump got in as well, is that he just blustered in like a punk rocker and just called it as it was, and people kind of saw that as refreshing. So I can understand completely how we're disengaged, but unfortunately, given what we're facing in the future, we have to find a way to come together more than ever and make some enormous decisions about our country and where we're headed, because, we are heading towards a cliff, as we know, in climate and all sorts of other factors. And if we can't sort that out, we're in serious trouble. We need to find a way to reach consilience on these big issues. Otherwise, it's going to be too late.
Absolutely. Yeah, we really don't have time. We have to turn this around in the next decade, as all the reports are telling us. So, Craig, you've gone on to mute.
And sorry, by the way, I'm not suggesting that joining major parties is the only way to solve this, or indeed that it would on its own do this. There needs to be a large amount of, I'm just saying that in a sense, the parties have lost touch with their grassroots,
Yeah.
which means that what's left? What's the voice that's left there? The voice that's left is donors. The voice that's left are those that are influential in that way. And we need to reform it across the board. And that's what's so interesting about community independence is that they've got a very tight link with their community. And I do find it fascinating that those groups, even in rural areas, tend to be more active on climate change.
It was so inspiring to see that. I'd heard about the community in that's in the northeast of Victoria. Yeah, that I think gives us great hope just to see them working with community members like that. But yeah, at the moment, independents make up a very small majority. So yeah, how do you think we can create this community that's engaged enough to care? I mean, obviously, we're trying very, very hard.
It's interesting. I would say quickly, Craig, sorry, that for anyone who's interested, especially in the climate, check out what Simon Holmes' court's done with this Climate 200, because really, as we know, the Liberals only hold a one-seat majority. And even if we can get 3 independents in the next election, that will really tip the balance of power. And we could get some legitimate climate action there from those independents. So, this isn't a big pipe dream that's 10 or 15 years away. If we can galvanise, especially in the lead up to the next election, as Simon says, we could wake up to a very different country the next day when it comes to climate. So I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at that site, the Climate 200, and they're really pushing for certain independents that have very strong science-based climate policies to get involved and make a change. And
it's funny, Climate 200, because I think it's great what they're doing, but I think it's sad that they have to exist. You know what I mean? Because for so long, the majority of the population in Australia has actually said we want action on climate change. The fact that that is not reflected in the political system shows the flaw. It's not translating across that. So the fact that we have to get people funding climate positive candidates, and the fact that that's still going to be in a climate where there will be possibly a billionaire mining magnate who can put in $80 million. It's that disproportionality of it that is so utterly ridiculous. We have to bring in some kind of cap on spending and donations so that the people you're sitting down with and saying, let's write these letters, don't feel like, well, what the fuck's the point if somebody's going to have $80 million there? We've got to bring back that kind of feeling of my democratic action has some influence.
Well, those letters are still, if you're letting your elected representative, your member of parliament, know that if they don't change their tune, then you're not going to vote for them. Of course, if there's only 1 or 2 people doing that, they're going to be like, oh, whatever. But there are more and more groups, local groups, community members, looking at who is my MP going to listen to? Are they going to listen to doctors? Are they going to listen to their own faith-based group? And using that power. But
I think it is really powerful. I don't think that politicians in Australia, it's not that they're totally shut off from their electorate. They're still very attuned to their electorate. If you talk to a politician, I think you're actually surprised the opposite of how attuned they are. And so the more that electorate is feeding back to them. And it comes back to the thing of going, if you don't do that, if you're not feeding back to your member and going, hey, there's 200 of us got together and wrote these letters and really think this is important, what are they going to be hearing? They're going to be hearing predominantly from when they go to Canberra, a lobbying situation that's going to be very much skewed the other way. And ironically, in Canberra, when you get a letter writing case, and I knew someone that walked in a political room, they said, if we get one letter, we presume there's hundreds of people that probably wanted to write that letter as well. So you kind of get one letter for every 100 people that care. When it comes to lobbying down in Canberra, you basically have 100 people that are representing 2 or 3 people that care about something. It's the opposite.
Craig, I just ask a question too. After I saw the film, I sort of did a deeper dive on the just how sort of much the political donations were coming from, especially the fossil fuel sector. And there's some pretty incredible stats where there's some companies that are paying more in political donations than they are in tax. So like Chevron Australia, which I think is 900 million, didn't pay a cent in tax, but donated 130 grand. So like, oh my God. So have you, in terms of in the research, what other sort of countries are setting that example of actually having public funded elections and getting any sort of corporate involvement out and allocating a certain amount of money to each party? Is that actually happening in a legitimate way in any part of the world?
It does happen. I actually couldn't find any countries where they were solely publicly funded, but there are a lot of countries where it's much higher proportion publicly funded. And this is the thing, is that we did bring in public funding in Australia. We do actually have that. So you know, if you ran just on public funding in Australia, and you have to set up in a way so that new parties can come through and all of that, what you might see is less ads on TV. Now, politicians would say, but that's a crucial part of it. You go, well, United Kingdom, Britain, the very democracy we copied ourselves on, has had bans on political advertising on television and digitally for years there, forever. So it's not a crucial part of your democracy to have that. You can run a different type of democratic campaign that isn't as expensive and that does just rely on that public funding. So I think we can definitely go down that particular route. There are some high court cases that probably mean that we'll never get rid of all donations, but because they're seen as a free speech issue, but bringing in caps and limits is totally achievable and would kind of fix a lot of the problems.
The Greens have been calling for that too. They've got that as part of their policy, don't they?
Yeah, Greens too. There's movement there. I think there's some bills being put through by independents. The Greens have been pushing for it. Labor has actually said they'll change their threshold to $1,000 for declarations. So there's changes happening there. I think you need those caps there to really make it so you don't have the kind of $80 million blow everything out of the water, or the kind of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it is interesting because, you know, you said, look, I can't make this directly, but you said, Damon, about, you know, Chevron gives 120 grand in donations and nothing in tax. Whenever people say, hang on a second, we can't just have publicly funded elections, it's too expensive. You know, I reckon it's way more expensive this way, because if you give a 20 grand donation to your politician, I reckon the contracts on the other side generally are a lot bigger, and we end up paying it a very different way. And I'm not saying it's not a chicken and egg relationship. It's not. That's what the genius of the system. You know, everything we showed you in this documentary is legal. The system is being set up, so this is all legal. So yeah, but I think it would actually we'd save a lot of money long term.
Well, listen, guys, I think we should get to some questions in the Q&A, because there's quite a few stacking up here, and they're connecting into what we're talking about. Got a question from Ingrid. This ties into what we've been just talking about. How can we get more transparency into the money streams?
We just need to actually have the laws there that require it, and we also need to probably have a national corruption commission to enforce them. At the moment, we have very low laws and very low enforcement, so that's not a great system.
Yeah, I think too, there's some really interesting, you know, it still can freak people out a bit, and I think we haven't really got people up to speed on what blockchain can actually do, because at the moment we just hear that word and we think of cryptos and it's all been bastardized. But there are some potentially exciting elements of that blockchain that some countries are already exploring with in terms of their voting, even in transparency around budgeting, so that there's a public ledger that everyone can access and see the chain right through. Of Taiwan's doing this now, of how their budgets are being allocated, so we can all see that spend, where the donations are coming through. We can track that right back. So it's really kind of this radical transparency. That's what they're calling it in Taiwan. So I'd urge anyone to have a look at that story. Audrey Tang is the minister there who's implemented all of this, and they're live streaming their policy discussions now. Lobby group meetings, get people can tune in and watch them happen. Like, they've just tried to just flip the whole thing and make sure they're sharing it with the country. So I suspect that's largely why China is suddenly flexing their muscles with them too, because they are actually one of the most progressive, authentic democracies in the world right now. And I think there's a lot we could learn from them in utilizing the best elements of tech before they get, you know, hijacked and whatnot. But there's some elements there that we should really look into in the future.
Couldn't even use our Google Docs system. How are they going to go with blockchain?
I know. On the NBN too. Yeah.
We've got another question, and I'm going to have to ask about this because, as I said, my knowledge of politics is not huge. But if you could tackle this one, could we ever get to change our government to sortition? I don't actually know what that is. Sortition?
Now, is that, I mean, are you thinking about, is this the kind of model where members of the public become part of a kind of democratic jury that decides decisions making? There's some interesting models on that. It's happened in France to deal with some of their climate change policy, and was really effective. They're doing some trials of it up in the Byron Bay area. I know there's an organization, New Democracy, who are really kind of pushing this stuff at the moment. So it's really interesting. We wanted to get to that in this doco, but in the end we kind of went, that's, you know, it seemed like the next step along, because we still were kind of dealing with the problems we've got now. But yeah, there's some really fascinating stuff. And again, it's a way of getting more engagement from the community in decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's the participatory democracy, they call it as well. And there's even like a participatory budgeting where they'll allocate the community a certain amount of the budget and say, you come up with what you think that should be spent on. And it's been really successful, especially when they've given the community much larger funds. If it's a smaller amount, it doesn't feel that significant. But when they actually can make meaningful change, there's been some extraordinary things that have been pushed there. But I think Craig was mentioning this earlier. If we are going to go that way, which is really important, at the same time, we need this radical education and enlightenment as well to happen at the same time. Because if we do decentralize that voting system and everyone's coming at it like we are now, where everyone's got a different view and a different narrative they're believing, that's going to be a very fractured democracy as well. So at the same time, we almost need this new enlightenment to happen. I would reconfigure algorithms on Facebook and all sorts of other things to make sure people are getting educated and not kept on site and to put in tribal in-group dynamics. But that's another conversation. But I do think we have the potential to do that and upskill everyone and then make them active participant citizens. I mean, that's kind of, you know, I think the system now is so complex that we can't govern from a centralized authority anymore. There's too many things going on. So we need to find ways to give more people power at their local level. We can do it with energy, with food, the manufacturing piece. People want that empowerment again at their local level, and we've got some of the tech to back that up. So I do think that might happen, and we could do that in the years ahead.
I've got a great question here from Vicky. What incentives do you think we need to entice politicians to reduce their dependence on donations and focus on the needs of the community in a timely manner to address climate change, rather than waiting for the election of sufficient independence?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the kind of thing about this kind of change. If we could actually get this kind of change where you had caps on how much could be spent by a politician, there's no point continuing to get more and more money. And it's interesting that both Malcolm Turnbull and Sam Dastyari said this is an arms race between the major parties. And the fear is you go, at the way it is now, because there's no caps, right? So you go, it doesn't make any sense for one party to go, we've got enough money now, we can settle down and run, because they know the other party's still going out and getting more. And it's this kind of constant battle to get more and more. If we have caps in there, then you think about it, you go, well, I can only spend $100,000 in this campaign, right? So I've got a limit to how much I'm going to advertise. So realistically, what I'm going to have to do is spend a lot more time back in my community door knocking, or during my 3 years of government, I'm going to have to spend a lot more time engaging with my community. And that's why some of these fixes immediately force people back to being with the community more. And to come to your climate change question, what's the thing when you look at the community? Well, the actual community, statistically shown, great majority actually do want action on climate change. So, you know, the more you have that link between the community and their politician, the more I think you'll get that change actually happening on the climate. And look, are we going to get that reform before? Look, I think at the moment, I mean, we've kind of got probably more pressure, thankfully, on the climate issue at the moment than on the reform issue at the moment. I mean, I'm just reading the Daily Telegraph today, and they're
green and gold.
Yeah, so there's momentum on all fronts, but I think we do have to fix this underlying stuff.
Yeah, and also I think that as many people on this call will know, and you certainly, Craig, is that, you know, we are, like, Australia is very limited in actually what it makes money from and drives its economy by. And it is, you know, we are the #1 exporter of coal in the world, top 3 for gas. And we actually don't, apart from iron ore, that's pretty much it. We're not very diverse in what we actually offer. We do have some tourism and education, obviously, which taken a massive hit. But both parties are so tied to that they're so reluctant to let that sort of power go, because it has created such wealth and it's been so beneficial for us. But we now face this enormous challenge there of what do we pivot to? How do we make our money from? That's why people are clinging on so tightly to what has been so lucrative to us. But again, I guess that's what we're trying to say here. This is the opportunity, is to move into something more. Export renewable energy to Asian countries. Some of our technologies in infrastructure. Ship the hydrogen to Korea. We need to actually move away from this to get any sort of break in a deadlock from either party, because it's really all we've got. If it was our salary, we'd be dependent on this one bit of income, which is this huge sector. And I think it was Upton Sinclair who said that, you know, it's impossible to get a man to understand when his salary depends on him not understanding. And that's kind of Australia, I'd say, around our climate action. We're just so addicted and wedded to how we've made our money, but both parties, that they're just petrified of changing. So unless that shifts as well, they're going to keep clinging on. So all these sort of things have to happen simultaneously. But again, that's why so many people are doing modeling now on what a new future looks like for us, and all these incredible opportunities that we have to diversify our industry too, and manufacture more things here instead of shipping them away, to get our beautiful technologies offshore, to regenerate our landscapes, all these things we have to offer. And I think it's only going to take, when we do that, we're going to break this deadlock of what's been wedding both parties to this addiction that we've had for the last 2 decades.
And yeah, and what you're saying there about these narratives that are currently there, we need to be telling different stories, and we can tell those stories when we're talking one-to-one with people. We can tell them through film, as you both have so well. But we need to be telling them more often with the people around us, and then also talking to our elected representatives about them. So we've got a question from Nathan. Such a thought-provoking and funny film. I'm a secondary school humanities teacher, and my mind was ticking over with ideas about how I can incorporate this in my civics program, an area which is sadly underrepresented. Do you have any ideas about how this could be used in schools? And I want to second that, because I wish that I'd watched something like this in school that would have gotten me excited about politics and like to do something, which I wasn't at the time.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some resources that are going to be attached to this that will link to the to school programs, and I hope there are, because I took out lots of swear words because teachers kept saying we can't play it if you leave them in there. So, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, it'd be great to have this played in schools and have kids engage with it, because I think particularly around that high school level, you know, when you're really starting to question society and how it works and that, I think it's essential to have that kind of engagement. And yeah, so look, there will be some school-based stuff coming out as well to link to it.
And there's so many potential young leaders emerging right now in our country. Some of those kids that are running some of these climate groups are just extraordinary, and how eloquent and articulate they are, that I would love to see some of them get into politics, that they would change the direction of our country very quickly.
But that's the interesting thing. That's the one thing where I think I sometimes disagree with people about politics, is that people go, oh, everyone in politics sucks, right? They're all terrible. I've known people who are great people who go into politics, and they come out of it slightly husks of themselves in a sense, because, you know, these people go in with great intentions to do stuff and they can't get it done. And that's why the kind of, you've got to go, we've got to fix this structural stuff, because otherwise, even when you do get good people going in there, they can't get the change that they've gone into, which leads to that greater cynicism and that. So yeah, I want to make it so that when those great leaders in the climate talks get people going in there, that they don't get chewed up and spat out.
And then putting more effort into, as you said before, like we need to be campaigning for these legislation changes so that there are caps on donations, so
yeah,
that we can. And
exactly, it's funny how people said to me, oh, it's strange you did this, you know, documentary after doing 2 climate change documentaries. I'm like, no, it's not. This is the third step of a climate change documentary.
So connected. Yeah.
I'll just throw in too that the media, I mean, I'm sure you thought about covering that too, mate, but just the way the media's influenced our politics in this country has been as influential as anywhere in the world, really. Yeah. And that's how we've got to shift that particular fourth estate as well if we're going to get meaningful change.
Yeah, no, that definitely kept coming up. There were so many elements to this corruption that you're like, oh, we've got to focus on one.
There's a really great question here from Meg. Do we need to play the game in order to quickly enact change, i.e. climate, before it's too late? Or is indulging in this still dirty politics, even if it's actually for the greater good? So playing the game, dirty politics.
I mean, I presume that's referring back to the kind of Climate 200 stuff we said earlier. I think that what you can do if you're having to play that game is be the best you can be. So you can be really transparent with where the money's coming from. You know, you can set that high standard. And I've noticed voices for groups talking about them getting donations in. It's like, there's nothing to say that getting donations from the public is a bad thing, as long as you set some kind of limits and you are transparent with it to an extent. So I think that we're not talking about a system where, like, I mean, I kind of hate it in a way that, you know, you kind of go, I've got one person, one vote, and I've also got to put in $100 to get my, you know, party to win or whatever. But that's at least a better system than one person, one vote linked with a few people kick in massive amounts and everyone else is caught out. So I think it's not necessarily bad as long as you are being really clear about what you're doing at the time.
I think we've got time for a few more questions. This is quite a long one from Helen. Could an independent organisation funded by voter donations become a lobby group for large impact topics such as climate change? The lobby group could give grants to independents, pay for ads to drive public awareness, pay for journalism, actively lobby using, say, Malcolm Turnbull as the chairman. We could call it seat at the table. What do we think about that?
I mean, I think this happens to an extent in England at the moment, but the problem is, again, it's why it comes back to the kind of caps. You know, at the moment, the money on one side is in no way commensurate to, essentially, you've got industries in Australia that have been the predominant earners of money for an enormous amount of time. They have an enormous amount of cash left over. And that means that you can never get the new industries that are going to replace them ever having the same kind of cash to compete. And that's why we need to stop the arms race to make it so that, you know, that kind of action will have any influence.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that in the 1980s, we virtually didn't have a single lobby group or lobbyist in Australia. And now there's sort of something like, well, Craig would know, but more than 5,000.
Yeah,
now, I prefer we just piss that off. Like, I mean, that is just corroding our democracy as well. And so many back table deals going on. Extraordinary. I think in the last 20 years, 35% of the donations, $1 billion, we don't even know where they came from. You know, so I would rather us just try and develop an independent body that just allocates certain funding to different parties to let them campaign on, and we just keep all of the other stuff out of it, and it's publicly run, you know, and it's radical transparency. I think that's what we should be aiming for, because we know with the vested interests, they're polluting the waters far too much.
Absolutely. A question from Stuart. So what's the ultimate model? Ultimate.
There's a few different models being put out there at the moment. They all tend to be fairly similar. The Australian Democracy Network's got a really interesting kind of manifesto out of changes that need to happen. And it's funny, people often ask me, what's the one change you're going to make? It's like, this is one area where it's not a one change thing.
No.
You've got to make a whole suite of changes, because if you kind of go, you can't make a donation anymore, but you can still say to somebody, hey, mate, you know what? I'll give you a job in my company for $400,000 a year as soon as you leave Parliament. That's itself a kind of influence. So you've got to really just tighten up and clean up the way in which money can influence the system. And that comes from caps on donations, caps on spending. It comes from transparency. It comes from preventing the revolving door. It comes from all of these little things. But there tends to be the same list of things that come out from all different organizations when they do it. And they're sitting there. We just got to actually get the kind of community pressure on the politics to make a change.
Yeah, and that community pressure, that's coming up in a few of the questions now as well. And I remember back in the movie, there was, I think it was Angus on the Noongar station, and I think he was wanting to, you know, stop fracking happening on his land and that land, but he felt this sense of powerlessness. His voice wasn't being heard. There's a question here about that from Karina. How can proactive voices get a seat at the table with conservative politicians so they hear a balanced voice without having to take them to dinner?
Well, I think it is about community coming together. I mean, you can contact your politician your own, but I think groups coming together, like Climate for Change or whatever, where you go, let's find all these people, and so that when we go and talk to our member, they go, oh, this is not just Beryl. Yep. You're here representing 1,000 people in the electorate and that kind of thing. And that gives us so much more voice to what's going on. So I think that's an important part of what you need to do, is to actually just, increase your voice through, I guess, organising together, which is what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and also speaking to any MP in this space, in the climate, if they get that one email or one letter, they just sort of pass it on. But when they get 15 people turning up to their office and saying, we're here to talk to you, or, you know, or getting together and write a letter, that sort of peer pressure it's amazing the psychology of that and how it can affect the human brain. And some of these, we forget sometimes, some of our politicians are human and they are fallible and they are susceptible to that sort of peer pressure. And so I would urge anyone to get with others and write together rather than doing something on your own. It's far more potent.
And it is interesting how recently I've noticed a few kind of, I guess, coalition members being more active and proactive about climate and other issues like that. And interestingly enough, a lot of them seem to be in seats where there is a fairly strong voices of movement. And I wonder whether the pressure is being felt, or they're kind of going, there's this group in my electorate who keep bugging me saying that the number one issue people care about is climate or corruption like that. You wonder if that has a feedback mechanism in kind of making people go, I better be a bit more active. Now, whether that leads to change is the big question. You know?
It feels like, you know, I've had some experience with our other amazing volunteers running these MP engagement groups. And a lot of the time in our climate conversations and in these groups, people think, oh, it's just one letter. What is it going to do? As you said, you know, one. But there are groups and, you know, coalitions of another kind of other organisations. There's like Doctors for the Environment and Australian Parents for Climate Action. And they're national networks now of people coming together and putting pressure on MPs all in their own electorates. And I really loved the part in the movie where you interviewed David Barrow from the Sydney Alliance, and he was saying, if you sign 1,000 petitions, so that's just like the formal ones on the internet, that might equal one like personalised letter, and 1,000 letters equals one phone call if you actually pick up the phone and call your MP, and 1,000 phone calls equals one meeting. So they do, yeah, you can actually, people don't realise you can actually write a letter and ask your MP for a meeting, and you might have to do that a couple of times and they might say, no, I'm too busy, or they might ignore you, and you have to keep trying. And that's what our groups are doing. They're actually meeting their MPs, and some of them say, some moderate Liberals, for example, are starting to change their tune on climate because they can see that the community really wants it, and they're going to lose their seat if they don't.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's good.
Found that really powerful.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's active democracy. It's participating. That's the great thing about it.
I've got a few more questions, but I think we might have time for one more. Oh my goodness, I have to choose now. Well, I have just there's a comment just at the bottom. How do you find all these existing groups? Because there are a lot of them out there now, and if you're part of a it might be through work, such as the doctors. It might just be through a simple Google search, but there are networks as well, like the Climate Action Network. But we can help you link into groups like that as well. I really encourage everybody to come along to one of our MP engagement groups, because we talk about all other different actions and campaigns you can be a part of as well. But it doesn't take long to find them. And there's just one, we'll finish with one question from Milen. I'm curious to know if you received feedback from MPs or politicians so far. How can we make sure it is used constructively by them?
It's interesting. It's fascinating talking to politicians about this issue, because there's a couple of things you see. Firstly, it's very normalized to them. So, you know, if you think your flatmate was like, I wasn't shocked by this, some politicians will just watch this and go, I don't even understand why this is on television. Like, isn't that just what happens? Like, it's kind of like, why are you know, this is just how it works. There are others though that I think are frustrated by it. As I said, there are good people that go into politics and get frustrated by not being able to achieve change. So the problem is this: for them to really get their parties or to get the system changed means that they have to have a lot of the community. It has to make it feel like the whole of the community really wants it to change. One of the big responses I got from politicians after doing War and Waste is, we don't lead, we follow. And it's true. A politician is sniffing the air. If they start to get the sense that, oh my God, the community has really got to the end of their tether, they want a national corruption commission and they're not going to put up with a kind of dodgy one. That's what that means. Those people that are the good people and whatever position of power or bureaucracy or wherever can use that to really motivate that change. So I think that it is crucial. It's why letter writing and getting together and doing this is so essential, because a politician who doesn't feel that pressure from the community to make the positive change, it's always easier for them to do nothing. It's way easier in politics to do nothing.
Do you have anything to add to that, Damon?
No, it's great advice. And I'd just say that, especially in this moment, we've talked about that before, the stakes couldn't be any higher. And it's up to all of us to find our agency and remember that we are citizens and these people work for us. And so meet up with others and join together and go outside of your comfort zone and be bold, because especially the next election, I mean, we all know this is the moment, and it's probably one of the most important in our history, that we've got to get right. We've got to get meaningful action. So please be courageous and speak up, because your voice is needed. That's all I'd say. And again, thanks to Craig for getting this out at this moment in this time and making it so accessible. This is the power of storytelling and why we need people telling these stories and making these things clearer for the general public. So good on you, mate. Bravo. And may it absolutely fly next week on ABC.
Yeah, thanks to Christian. It was just, people were just so relieved I'm not on camera. They're like, oh, thank God, finally. Craig's behind the camera.
Yeah, you've popped through. You're emerging and you're in there still.
Thank you, guys. And look, congratulations to everyone who's on this call and engaged and doing letter writing and all that, because, that's kind of what we would love people to be doing. It's what we need. So, yeah, congrats.
Well, I'll wrap up with this last one. I think I said the last one was last, but final question. You've probably already half answered this now, but what are the best solutions to the problems raised in this film? Are there any others that we haven't touched on yet?
I don't know if there's anything we haven't touched on. But as I said, look, you need two things. To get this kind of change, we need a really active community that says that it matters to them. And we need, pressure on politicians so that they know that we want it to change. And as I said, like, this is the thing is, I've done a couple of docos on climate. Damon's done fantastic work in the climate space. And I don't know about you, Damon, but I just find there's always a moment in that where you hit a wall and you go, this doesn't make sense at all. This doesn't make sense. Australia's position just doesn't make sense. And that's where this kind of issue of influence and money and that is influencing. It's messing up the climate space a lot. And so hopefully we need to get this fixed to fix other problems as well. I mean, if we get this fixed, it'll help with things like gambling as well. All these other issues that are social problems in our community will be helped as well.
Did you want to add anything to that, Damon?
No, I just totally agree. And yeah, even doing this film I've been doing lately and positing all this better future and speaking to all these people, I realized that none of it could happen unless we fix this part, which is what Craig's talking about. If we get this democracy part right, we stop this pollution, then all these things that we can't even imagine could unravel from this moment, because we all know that we're actually in the majority here. The majority of Australians want a very different Australia than what we have right now. And it's right there. We're just being blocked by a very small group of people. So if we can actually knock that wall out, there'll just be this flood of change. And we just got to hold on to that and keep going and keep spreading the message, because we're not that far away, potentially. And we can have a very different country with enormous opportunities and reinvigorated communities again. So, that's what gets me up every day. And I encourage everyone to just believe that and keep going and share this stuff.
If you want to see what this utopia is like, there's this movie called 2040. You should have a look at it.
The guy's really annoying.
Damon promises it'll. I promise you that if we fix this, it'll be like that. Okay.
19 years to go, man. We're on track.
We're on track.
Well, I think that's absolutely the start. Like educating yourself and talking to the people around you, and you can start that by watching a documentary together and then having a discussion afterwards. And what we talk about in our Climate for Change, our climate conversations is, there's many things you could be doing, but one really big one is reaching out to the people around you. And, it might be people who you'll find that more people than you think really care about this issue. But most of us don't know where to start because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So starting with educating yourself, And then the other thing, as we've been talking about, is stepping up and reaching out and writing a letter, calling, visiting your MP. And I see in the chat there, we've been sharing some links. One of them's climateforchange.org.au/MPEG. That's got more information about our MP engagement groups. And you can come to one of our Zoom monthly meetups anywhere around Australia, Zoom in. I think the next one's on October 27th. And yeah, and just have a chat and ask questions. And there's also a resource page in there that our MPEG's coordinator, Sue, has just posted. She kind of made those groups, got them started. And so, yeah, it is really exciting to come together with other people. And it's not so much a drag like, oh, what am I going to write about? It's like, oh, we're all doing this together. And I'm always so inspired by seeing everybody in the room. Or it is nice when we can actually get together in the room, but we can also do that over Zoom. And one of the other things that you can do if you want to be part of what we do here at Climate for Change is to host a climate conversation. And if you are in a state where you can meet in person, as in somewhere around Australia that doesn't have restrictions, then you can have people over to your house. But we have been running them very successfully online as well with about 10 of your mates. And we have a trained facilitator who actually takes you through everything and keeps the conversation going. And just to wrap up, I think there's going to be, I think Hillary's just posted, there's going to be a screening of Big Deal on ABC. So if anybody missed it or if you want to tell somebody to watch it, it's going to be streaming on ABC and iView Tuesday, 19th of October. So yeah, share it around. And I want to say another thank you, of course, to our wonderful panelists, Craig and Damon. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been, I can't believe there's so many questions here. We haven't even got through half of them, I think, but it was so good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for hosting, and thanks for Climate for Change and everything you do as well. It's fantastic.
Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, again, thanks to Leanne and from Jungle Entertainment and the 2040 team. And of course, Hillary for putting this all together. You know, many, many hours have gone into an event like this. And this has raised thousands of dollars, $4,500 for Climate for Change. So we will make that count and keep supporting people to have conversations and to reach out and to take action. So
you're going to say we are going to donate that to a political party now, anonymously. Yeah.
We're going to buy Barnaby Joyce.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.